The homeless man appeared on her doorstep during the worst storm October had ever thrown at the city, and Brenna Mitchell made the mistake of looking into his eyes. She'd been coming home late from her shift at the downtown bakery, arms aching from kneading dough for 12 hours straight, when she'd nearly tripped over him. He sat hunched against her apartment building's brick facade, rain plastering dark fabric to his thin frame. Most people would have hurried past. Most people would have pretended not to see. But Brenna had grown up with nothing, had spent 3 winters of her childhood in a shelter, and she couldn't walk past suffering without acknowledging it. "Are you all right?" she asked, crouching down despite the rain soaking through her jacket. He lifted his head, and she found herself staring into eyes that seemed to shift between gray and silver in the streetlight's glow. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, but there was something aristocratic in his features that didn't match the ragged clothes. His hair, plastered wet against his skull, looked almost colorless in the dim light. "Cold," he said, and his voice carried an accent she couldn't place, old-fashioned, formal, like he'd learned English from century-old books. "Wait here," Brenna said, though she realized immediately how ridiculous that sounded. Where else would he go? She ran upstairs to her cramped studio apartment and threw together what she could. Leftover chicken soup from yesterday, a thick slice of the rosemary bread she'd brought home from work, and a thermos of hot tea. She grabbed one of her ex-boyfriend's old jackets from the back of her closet, the one Marcus had never bothered to retrieve when he'd moved out 6 months ago. The man was still there when she returned, sitting in exactly the same position, as if he hadn't moved a muscle. Rain continued to pour, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "Here," she said, kneeling beside him and opening the container of soup. Steam rose into the cold air. "It's still warm, and take this jacket, you'll freeze to death out here." He looked at the offerings for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his pale features. Then slowly he reached out and accepted the thermos with hands that trembled slightly. "You are kind," he said, and the words sounded like they hurt him somehow. "It's just soup," Brenna said, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Everyone deserves a warm meal." She stayed while he ate, partly to retrieve her containers, and partly because something about leaving him alone in the storm felt wrong. He consumed the food slowly, methodically, as if he'd forgotten how to eat and had to remember each step. When he finished, he handed everything back to her with a careful precision that seemed out of place. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes again. In the streetlight, his irises definitely looked silver now, an impossible color that made her breath catch. "You have shown me mercy I do not deserve." "Everyone deserves mercy," Brenna replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Marcus certainly hadn't thought she deserved a second chance when she'd lost her job at the restaurant. "Will you be all right out here?" "I have endured worse." Something about the way he said it made her think he wasn't exaggerating. She wanted to offer more: her couch, a blanket, money for a shelter, but her bank account was already overdrawn, and her apartment barely fit her. So she just nodded, gathered her containers, and headed inside, glancing back once to see him watching her with those strange, luminous eyes. The next night, he was there again. Brenna had been half expecting it, so she'd prepared extra dinner. Pasta with marinara sauce, garlic bread, and a bottle of water. He accepted it with the same solemn gratitude, the same careful movements that seemed rehearsed or ritualistic. "I'm Brenna," she offered, sitting on the step beside him while he ate. The rain had stopped, but the October air bit cold. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "You may call me Draev," he said finally, as if giving his name was some great concession. "That's unusual. Where are you from?" "Very far from here." His tone made it clear the conversation was closed. They sat in silence while he finished eating. Brenna found herself studying him more carefully now. His clothes were definitely too thin for the weather, an ancient-looking black coat that might have been elegant once, torn in places and missing buttons. His boots were worn through at the soles, but it was his hands that caught her attention. Long-fingered, aristocratic, with nails that looked almost claw-like in their length and shape. And his skin, even in the yellow streetlight, appeared unnaturally pale, almost luminous. "Are you sick?" she asked. "Your skin looks—" "I am not ill," he interrupted, a hint of something sharp entering his voice. "Merely different." Brenna decided not to push. Everyone had secrets, especially people living on the streets. Maybe he had a condition, something that made him photosensitive or anemic. It wasn't her business, but she came back the next night and the next and the next. It became routine over the following weeks. She'd finish her shift at Morrison's bakery, stop by the corner store for whatever ingredients she could afford, cook something simple in her tiny kitchen, and bring it down to Draev. Sometimes she sat with him while he ate. Sometimes she was too exhausted and just handed over the food before trudging upstairs to collapse. He never asked for it, never begged or pleaded. But he was always there, sitting in the same spot against the brick wall, and something in Brenna couldn't bear the thought of him going hungry. She began to notice things about him that didn't add up. His clothes, though ragged, were made of materials that looked expensive under close inspection: silk lining in the coat, hand-stitched details on the shirt. He spoke with a formality that suggested education, old-world manners that belonged in period dramas rather than city streets. And he never seemed to get dirtier despite sleeping rough. His hair, which she could see now was indeed white or platinum blonde, always looked clean despite the lack of facilities. "Why don't you go to a shelter?" she asked one night in early November, when the first frost had started forming on the sidewalks. "There are places that could help you, get you back on your feet." Draev's expression darkened. "I cannot be around many people. It is not safe." "Are you in trouble, running from someone?" In a manner of speaking. He set down the empty container. "She'd made beef stew tonight, thick with vegetables and potatoes. But the danger is not to me." That should have been a warning. Should have sent her running back upstairs and prompted her to call the police. Instead, Brenna found herself leaning closer. "What do you mean?" He turned those silver eyes on her, and for the first time she saw something ancient swimming in their depths. Something vast and terrible and beautiful all at once. "You should not concern yourself with me. Brenna Mitchell. Your kindness is noted, but it places you at risk. How do you know my last name?" "I never told you. I have ways of learning things." He stood abruptly, unfolding to his full height, and she realized with a start that he was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that the ragged coat couldn't quite hide. "You should go inside, lock your door, and perhaps tomorrow night you should not come back down." But she did come back down, because Brenna had never been good at following advice that didn't make sense. She brought chicken and rice, and he was there, and they didn't speak about the warning. Instead, he asked her questions about her life, why she worked at a bakery, what her dreams had been, whether she had family. "My mom died when I was 16, Brenna found herself saying, surprised by her own honesty. "Cancer. My dad left when I was a baby. I've got an older brother somewhere in California, but we don't really talk." "What about you?" "My family is." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Complicated, vast, demanding. I have not seen them in some time." "By choice?" "That is a more complex question than you realize." They fell into comfortable silence. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off and was quickly silenced. The city hummed around them, alive with nighttime energy sirens in the distance, music bleeding from apartment windows, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet. "Why are you really out here?" Brenna asked quietly. "And don't tell me it's because you have nowhere to go. You're educated. You speak 3 languages. I've heard you muttering in what sounds like Latin and something Slavic when you think I'm not listening. You don't have addiction issues as far as I can tell. So what is it? What are you hiding from?" Draev looked at her for a long moment, and something like pain crossed his pale features. "From myself," he said finally. "From what I am. From what I have done." Before she could press further, a scream cut through the night. Draev was on his feet instantly, moving with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for someone supposedly malnourished and weak. His head tilted, listening, and Brenna saw his nostrils flare as if scenting the air. "Go inside," he said, his voice dropping into a register that commanded obedience. "Now." But Brenna was already moving toward the sound, pulling out her phone to call 911. The scream had come from the alley beside her building, where the dumpsters lived and the lighting was poor. She rounded the corner and froze. A woman, young, probably college-aged, was pressed against the brick wall by a man whose movements seemed wrong, too fluid, too fast. The woman's neck was tilted at an unnatural angle, and the man's face was buried against her throat, and there was blood, so much blood running down her neck and staining her white blouse black in the darkness. "Hey!" Brenna shouted without thinking. "Get away from her!" The man's head snapped up, and Brenna's words died in her throat. His face was wrong, too pale, mouth stretched too wide, and his teeth, oh God, his teeth were elongated into fangs that dripped with blood. His eyes glowed red in the alley's shadows. He dropped the woman, who crumpled to the ground, and turned toward Brenna with a smile that promised agony. "How fortunate," the creature said, and his voice was silk over steel. "I was still hungry." Brenna stumbled backward, terror freezing her limbs. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. Things like this didn't exist outside of movies and books. But the woman was lying in a pool of blood, her chest barely moving, and the thing with fangs was stalking toward her with predatory grace. Then Draev was there, materializing between Brenna and the creature so fast she didn't see him move, and he had changed. His eyes blazed silver white, His lips pulled back to reveal fangs that matched the other creatures, and an aura of power rolled off him like heat waves, making the air shimmer. You dare hunt in my city? Draev's voice had transformed into something terrifying, layered with harmonics that made Brenna's bones vibrate. You dare spill blood on streets I claimed 3 centuries ago. The attacking vampire's confidence evaporated. He dropped to one knee, head bowed. My lord, I did not know we were told you had abandoned the throne, that you had gone into exile. And did my exile nullify the ancient laws? Draev's hand shot out, gripping the other vampire by the throat and lifting him off the ground as easily as Brenna might lift a bag of flour. Did my absence erase the covenants that protect these hunting grounds? Did you think yourself above the old codes? Mercy. My king, I gave you mercy when I allowed your bloodline to continue after the coup your house attempted. This is how you repay that mercy? Draev's hand tightened and Brenna heard bones crack. The attacking vampire's form began to deteriorate, skin graying, body withering as if centuries of age were catching up to him all at once. Within seconds, nothing remained but dust that scattered in the cold November wind. Brenna's knees gave out. She hit the concrete hard, shock overwhelming her system. Draev turned to her, and for a moment his face was still the terrible, beautiful mask of an apex predator. Then it softened, humanity bleeding back into his features, though the fangs remained visible. The woman, Brenna managed to gasp. Help her. Draev moved to the collapsed victim, kneeling beside her with surprising gentleness. He examined her neck, then bit into his own wrist without hesitation. Dark blood welled up and he pressed the wound to the woman's mouth. What are you? My blood will heal her, Draev said quietly. She will lose the memory of this night, wake tomorrow believing she had too much to drink and fell. It is a small mercy, but the only one I can offer. Brenna watched in stunned silence as color returned to the woman's face, her breathing steadied, and the terrible wounds on her neck sealed themselves until only faint pink lines remained. After a moment, Draev lifted her carefully and placed her near the alley's entrance where she'd be easily found. Then he turned back to Brenna and his silver eyes were full of ancient sorrow. Now you know, he said simply. Now you understand what I am. Brenna's mind raced, trying to process impossible information. Vampires, real vampires. And Draev, the homeless man she'd been feeding for weeks, was one of them. Was apparently their king if the other creature's words meant anything. She couldn't even finish the sentence. A monster, Draev supplied, his voice hollow. A creature of the night. A blood drinker who has lived for over 800 years and committed atrocities you cannot imagine. He took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched. Pain flashed across his face. This is why I told you to stop coming. Why I warned you away. You are too good, Brenna Mitchell. Too kind. And kindness should not be wasted on things like me. You saved her, Brenna whispered, looking at the unconscious woman. You saved me. I executed one of my own kind for breaking laws I established centuries ago. Do not mistake necessary justice for heroism. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone must have called the police after hearing the scream. Draev's expression grew urgent. You must go. When they question you, say you heard nothing, saw nothing. The woman will corroborate your ignorance. She will remember nothing of this. Tell no one what you witnessed here. But, please. The word came out raw, stripped of all his formal dignity. I have endangered you enough simply by being near you. If my kind learn that a human knows of our existence, if they discover you have been feeding one of us, harboring one of us, they will kill you, slowly, to punish me for my weakness in accepting your charity. Brenna struggled to her feet, her legs still shaky. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get as far from this creature as possible. But her heart remembered weeks of quiet conversations, of watching him eat the food she prepared with such careful gratitude, of the loneliness she'd seen in his ancient eyes. Will you be here tomorrow night? She asked. Draev stared at her as if she'd spoken in an alien language. You cannot mean to continue. Will you be here? A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the approaching sirens. Finally, Draev nodded once, a small, defeated movement. I will be here. I have nowhere else to go. Brenna turned and walked quickly toward her building's entrance, legs moving on autopilot. Behind her, she heard Draev's voice, soft as silk, soft as death. You are braver than you know, Brenna Mitchell, and far more foolish. She didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fangs and blood in glowing red eyes. She saw Draev transform into something terrible and powerful, saw him execute another vampire with casual ease, heard the other creature call him king, a vampire king, living on her doorstep, eating her leftovers. It was absurd, impossible, yet completely, undeniably real. As dawn broke over the city, Brenna dragged herself to the window and looked down at the street. The spot where Draev usually sat was empty. The police had cleared out hours ago, taking the confused woman to the hospital for observation. Yellow tape still cordoned off the alley, but there was no evidence of what had really happened. No body, no blood, just an empty space where a vampire had been reduced to dust. Brenna went to work in a daze, going through the motions of mixing dough and shaping loaves while her mind spun. Her co-worker, Sandra, asked if she was feeling all right. She mumbled something about not sleeping well and focused on her tasks, grateful that baking required precision that kept her hands busy even when her thoughts spiraled. All day, she debated. She could pack a bag and leave the city, start over somewhere else, pretend the previous night had been a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. She could call the police, tell them everything, though who would believe her? She could do the sensible thing and never go down to that doorstep again, let the Vampire King find his meals elsewhere. But when her shift ended and she stopped by the grocery store, she found herself buying ingredients for vegetable soup and fresh bread. Found herself cooking with the same care she always had. Found herself packaging everything up as darkness fell over the city, because here was the truth Brenna had to face. Draev had been living on her doorstep for weeks. He could have hurt her 100 times over, could have fed on her the first night she'd approached him. Instead, he'd warned her away. He'd protected her from another vampire. He'd shown her mercy even though he clearly believed he deserved none. And she'd seen the way he looked at the food she brought, not with the desperation of hunger, but with something deeper. Gratitude, wonder. As if her small kindness was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. She couldn't abandon him. Maybe that made her foolish. Maybe it would get her killed. But Brenna had survived her mother's death, her father's abandonment, years of poverty and struggle and betrayal, and she'd survived by holding on to one core truth. That compassion mattered. That small acts of kindness were the only things that made the world bearable. So she went downstairs as darkness fell, soup container warm in her hands, heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Draev was there, sitting in his usual spot, looking exactly as he always had, ragged coat, too pale skin, white hair catching the streetlight. But now Brenna saw him clearly, saw the preternatural stillness of his posture, the way shadows seemed to cling to him, the faint luminescence of his eyes. He looked up as she approached and surprise flickered across his face. "You came, I said I would." Brenna sat down beside him, maintaining a careful distance but refusing to show fear. "I made soup. The vegetable kind, since I don't actually know if you can eat regular food or if it's all, blood." Draev accepted the container, holding it like it was something precious. "We can eat human food. We do not need it for survival, but we can still taste, still remember what it was like to be mortal." He opened the container, and steam curled into the cold air. "Why are you here, Brenna? After what you witnessed, what I showed you, why would you return? Because you saved that woman. And because you've been sitting on my doorstep for weeks without hurting anyone. And because—" She took a breath. "Because I think you're punishing yourself for something. Living out here, accepting food from strangers, cutting yourself off from your people. That's not survival. That's penance." Draev went very still. For a long moment he just stared at the soup, steam rising around his pale face. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. 5 years ago I made a decision that led to the deaths of hundreds of my kind. A political move that backfired catastrophically. My court turned against me, my own blood-sworn advisors plotted my assassination. I was forced to execute allies, to purge entire bloodlines. And when the dust settled and I still held the throne, I looked at what I had become, at the monster the crown had made me, and I could not bear it. He set the soup aside, so I walked away, left my kingdom without a ruler, my people without a king. I came here to this human city and tried to disappear, to become nothing. But you're not nothing," Brenna said quietly. "That vampire last night, he recognized you, called you his king. You're still who you are, Draev. You can't just stop being that. Can I not? I have shed my titles, my crown, my power. I drink only from blood banks, stealing what I need rather than hunting. I sleep rough rather than claiming territory. I am less than the youngest fledgling now, and yet you still enforced your laws, still protected that woman. Still act like the king you say you're not." Brenna met his silver eyes steadily. "You can't undo the past by living in misery. You can't erase mistakes by destroying yourself." Spoken like someone who has never had blood on her hands. "My mother died because I couldn't afford her medication," Brenna said, her voice hard. "I was 16. I had a part-time job at a fast food place, and I chose to pay our rent instead of buying her pills because I thought we needed a roof over our heads more. She died 3 weeks later, and I've carried that guilt every single day since. So don't tell me I don't understand regret. Don't tell me I don't know what it's like to replay decisions and wish desperately you'd chosen differently." Draev looked at her with something like recognition. "I am sorry. That was thoughtless of me. They sat in silence while he ate the soup, and Brenna felt the tension slowly ease between them. This was familiar ground, sharing food, sharing space, the quiet companionship that had developed over weeks without her realizing how much it mattered. "Tell me about your world," she said finally. "The vampire world. How does it work?" Draev hesitated, then began to speak. He told her about the court's great houses of vampires that ruled territories across the globe, bound by ancient laws and older feuds. He explained the hierarchy: fledglings newly turned, still learning control, hunters who enforced laws and protected territory, lords who governed cities, and at the top, the old ones, the ancients who had walked the earth for millennia. "I was king of the Northern Court," he said. "My territory stretched from the Canadian border through the Great Lakes, covering 12 major cities and countless smaller holdings. Thousands of vampires pledged to my house, bound by blood oaths sworn over centuries. And you just walked away from all of that?" "I could not bear another night on that throne, could not face another petitioner seeking justice for slights real or imagined, could not navigate another web of political intrigue, could not sign another execution order. The weight of it, 800 years of decisions, of compromises, of necessary evils, it broke something in me." He stared at his pale hands. "So I fled, like a coward. Left my second in command to manage the chaos of my absence." "What's their name? Your second?" "Nikolai Erasmus. He has served my house for 400 years. If anyone can hold the court together in my absence, it is him." Brenna processed this, trying to imagine the kind of loyalty that lasted centuries. "Does he know where you are?" "No. I severed all connections when I left. It was cleaner that way, or lonelier." Draev's expression flickered. "Perhaps both." Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened. Brenna learned about vampire society, the laws that govern turning humans, the protocols for hunting, the complex etiquette of court politics. She learned that Draev had been turned during a plague year in medieval Europe, had been a minor nobleman dying of disease when an ancient vampire had offered him a choice: death or immortality. "I chose poorly," Draev said with bitter humor, "though I did not know it then." She learned that vampires could walk in sunlight only with great pain and for limited periods, that they could be killed by beheading or burning, that their bite carried venom that could either turn a human or simply enthrall them. She learned that the vampire world existed in the shadows of the human one, hidden by careful manipulation and ancient magic. And Draev learned about her. She told him about her childhood in foster care, her mother's illness, the brother who'd escaped to California and never looked back. She told him about Marcus, who'd promised forever and left the moment things got hard. About her dreams of opening her own bakery someday, a small place where everything was made by hand with care. "You have the soul of an artist," Draev observed one night in late November. Snow had started to fall, dusting his white hair with crystals that didn't melt. "You create beauty from simple ingredients, transform flour and water into sustenance and joy. There is nobility in that." Brenna laughed, but it came out sad. "There's no nobility in being broke and exhausted. I'm one missed paycheck away from being in the same position you are. The difference is that you did not choose this. I selected my exile. You are merely surviving circumstances beyond your control." He paused. "You deserve better, Brenna Mitchell." "So do you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection deeper than friendship but not yet nameable. Brenna felt her heart skip, felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. Draev looked away first, but not before she saw hunger flash in his silver eyes. Though she suspected it wasn't blood he craved, things changed between them after that night. The casual touches became charged, her hand brushing his when she passed him food, his fingers steadying her when she slipped on ice. The conversations grew more intimate, less about facts and more about feelings. The space between them on the doorstep shrank until they sat close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold that radiated from his body. Brenna started to understand what people meant about supernatural attraction. There was something magnetic about Draev, something that drew her in despite every logical reason to keep distance. Maybe it was the danger, maybe it was the loneliness she recognized in him that mirrored her own. Maybe it was simply that he looked at her like she was the most fascinating creature he'd encountered in 800 years. One night in early December, she brought Christmas cookies, gingerbread shaped like stars and trees, decorated with careful icing patterns. Draev held one up to the streetlight, examining it with wonder. "You made these? It's almost Christmas." Seemed appropriate. She'd stayed up past midnight after her shift to bake them, but his expression made it worth the exhaustion. He bit into one carefully, and his eyes closed. "I remember these, or something like them. My mother used to make spiced cakes during winter festivals before I was turned. I had forgotten the taste until this moment. Tell me about her, your mother. So he did, voice soft with memory. He spoke of a woman who died 7 centuries ago, a merchant's wife who'd taught him to read and value knowledge over mere wealth. He spoke of siblings long dead, of a father who'd arranged his marriage to a local lord's daughter, of the life he'd been supposed to live before disease, and a vampire's offer had changed everything. Do you regret it? Brenna asked. Becoming what you are? Every day. And yet I have witnessed wonders that mortal life could never have shown me. I have read books that no longer exist, spoken with scholars and artists and madmen across centuries. I have loved and lost and learned more than any single lifetime could teach. He met her eyes. The curse of immortality is that you have endless time to appreciate everything you have destroyed. You talk like you're the villain of your own story. Am I not? I am a predator who feeds on humanity. A monster who has killed thousands over the centuries, sometimes for necessity, sometimes for politics, sometimes simply because I could. His voice dropped. I am the thing children are warned about in bedtime stories. And yet you're sitting on a doorstep eating my cookies and looking sad about your mom, Brenna pointed out. Monsters don't do that. Then what am I? Complicated, powerful, ancient, dangerous. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his. His skin was cold as marble, but solid, real, and maybe worthy of the redemption you're seeking. Draev stared at their joined hands like he'd never seen such a thing before. You should not touch me, should not be this close. If I lost control for even a moment, but you won't. You've had weeks of opportunity, and you've never been anything but careful with me. You place too much faith in my restraint. I place faith in who you are, not what you are. Brenna squeezed his hand gently, then released it. Now finish your cookies. I didn't spend half the night baking them just to watch them get cold. But as she stood to leave, Draev caught her wrist. His grip was gentle but unmistakably firm, his hand easily encircling her smaller bones. Brenna, you must understand. This whatever is growing between us, it cannot go where you might wish. I am not human. I can offer you no future, no normal life. Only danger and complications you do not deserve. Who said I was wishing anything? Brenna countered, but her voice wavered. Because he was right. She did wish. Had been wishing for weeks now, ever since she'd started noticing how his rare smiles transformed his face, how his careful formality was really just a shield against being hurt. Your heartbeat gives you away. It quickens when you are near me. Your pupils dilate, your breathing changes. I have lived too long not to recognize attraction. His thumb brushed across her pulse point, and I am not immune to it. You are. Extraordinary. Compassionate and fierce and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with physical appearance. You make me wish I was still human, still capable of offering you something beyond darkness. Brenna's heart hammered against her ribs. Maybe I'm not afraid of the dark. Then you are a fool. But he said it gently, without heat, and when he released her wrist, his fingers trailed across her skin with unmistakable longing. That night Brenna lay awake again, but for different reasons. Her wrist still tingled where he'd touched her. Her mind replayed the conversation, the way he'd looked at her, the careful restraint in his every movement around her. He wanted her. She wanted him. And it was impossible, dangerous, completely insane. She was falling in love with a vampire king who lived on her doorstep and ate her leftovers. The situation would have been laughable if it didn't make her chest ache with confused longing. Things came to a head the week before Christmas. Brenna was closing up Morrison's bakery alone. Sandra had left early for a holiday party when 3 figures appeared in the shop's doorway. They moved with the same inhuman grace that Draev possessed, and their eyes reflected the bakery's lights with an unnatural shine. Brenna Mitchell, the leader said. He was tall, elegant, with the same white hair and pale skin that marked his kind. But where Draev's features held melancholy, this vampire's face was sharp with cruelty. We have questions about our missing king. Terror locked Brenna's muscles. I don't know what you're talking about. Do not insult us with lies, human. We have been watching, every night for 2 weeks now, observing your little ritual. Food brought to a doorstep. Conversations with what your neighbors surely believe is a homeless vagrant. He glided closer and Brenna backed against the counter. But we know better. We know our king's face, even hidden beneath mortal rags. We know his scent, and we know he has been accepting charity from a human woman foolish enough to feed him. He hasn't done anything wrong. He abandoned his throne. The vampire's voice cracked like a whip, and Brenna flinched. He left his court in chaos. His territories vulnerable to challenge, his people without proper leadership. Do you understand what happens when a vampire kingdom goes ungoverned? War. Bloodshed. Chaos that spills into the human world you claim to care about. Then talk to him. He's your king, ask him to come back. We are beyond conversation. The vampire's smile revealed fangs. Draev Erasmus has proven himself unfit to rule, weak, corrupted by human compassion. He must be removed from power permanently, which requires his death. But first we need him to reveal himself, and you, dear Brenna, are going to help us." The other two vampires moved to flank her. One was female, beautiful and cold as ice. The other was younger looking, maybe turned in his 20s, with feral hunger in his eyes. "I won't help you kill him, you will, or we will slaughter every person in this building, on this block, in this entire district until you comply. We will turn your city into a feeding ground and blame it all on the mad former king who lost control." The leader tilted his head, studying her. "Or you will walk out of here with us, allow yourself to be used as bait, and at least give Draev a chance to save you. He cannot resist the damsel in distress. It is one of his more tedious virtues." Brenna's mind raced. If she refused, people would die. If she complied, Draev might die. But at least if she went with them, she could try to warn him somehow. "Fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But you let everyone else in this neighborhood go. No hunting here, that's the deal. You presume to negotiate?" But the vampire looked amused. "Very well. For now these streets remain protected. Come." They took her out the back door into the alley, moving so quickly that Brenna's feet barely touched the ground. The world blurred around her, nausea rising as they transported her with supernatural speed. When everything finally stabilized, she found herself in a place that looked like it had been ripped from a gothic horror film. The room was vast, all stone walls and vaulted ceilings, lit by chandeliers that held actual candles rather than electric lights. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, depicting battles and coronations and scenes of impossible beauty. Furniture that looked centuries old, carved wooden chairs, velvet couches, marble tables filled the space with dark elegance. "Welcome to the Northern Court," the leader said with mock courtesy. "Or what remains of it in our king's absence. I am Vladimir Eldridge, current regent and soon-to-be ruler once this unfortunate interregnum ends. You're planning a coup. We are planning a necessary transition of power. Draev had centuries to prove himself worthy of the crown. He failed. Now it is time for stronger leadership." Vladimir pushed her into a chair, antique, uncomfortable, probably worth more than her entire apartment. The other vampires spread out around the room, and Brenna realized with growing horror that there were more of them. At least a dozen, all watching her with predatory interest. "Now," Vladimir said, pulling out an antique phone, the kind with an actual rotary dial. "Let us call your king and invite him to rescue you." But before he could dial, the massive wooden doors at the far end of the hall slammed open with enough force to crack the stone around them. Draev stood in the doorway, and he was nothing like the humble vagrant who'd been eating her soup. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace, making the air shimmer and dance. His eyes blazed silver white, bright enough to cast shadows. His ragged coat was gone, replaced by elegant black clothing that looked both modern and timeless, tailored pants, a fitted shirt, boots that gleamed like they'd been polished by servants. And behind him stood an army. Dozens of vampires filed into the hall, all bearing the same white hair and pale skin, all moving with military precision. At Draev's right hand stood a vampire who looked like he'd stepped from a Renaissance painting, beautiful, ageless, with eyes like frozen oceans. "Nikolai," Draev said quietly, never taking his blazing gaze from Vladimir. "How did you find me? You truly believed you could hide my king?" The vampire Nikolai spoke with obvious affection despite the formality. "I have known you for 4 centuries. I know how you think, where you run when the weight becomes too heavy. I have been watching over you since the day you left, waiting for the moment when you would need your people again." His expression hardened as he looked at Vladimir, and intercepting those who would use your absence to commit treason. Vladimir's confident smile had evaporated. "Lord Draev, I can explain kidnapping an innocent human, explain plotting to murder your rightful king, explain declaring yourself regent without the court's approval." Draev's voice was terrible, resonant with centuries of command. "You will explain all of this, Vladimir, at your trial, just before your execution." He crossed the distance to Brenna in 3 long strides and dropped to one knee before her chair, his blazing eyes searching her face. "Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine, scared, but fine." Brenna's hands shook as she reached out to touch his face, reassuring herself he was real. "You came, always. I will always come for you." He stood, drawing her up with him, and turned to address the assembled vampires. "Let it be known, this human is under my personal protection. She is blood sworn to House Erasmus, claimed by the king himself. Any who touch her answer to me. Any who threaten her face immediate execution. Any who even think of harming her will learn why I have held this throne for 8 centuries while others fell." The declaration rang through the hall like thunder. Vladimir's supporters shrank back, suddenly uncertain. Nikolai stepped forward and dropped to one knee, head bowed. My king, we are yours to command. One by one, the other vampires knelt. Even Vladimir's co-conspirators abandoned him, recognizing the shift in power. Within moments, only Vladimir remained standing, surrounded by his king's loyal forces. You cannot do this, Vladimir snarled. You abandoned us. You ran away like a coward. You have no right to that crown anymore. I have every right until someone strong enough takes it from me. Would you care to try? Draev's voice dropped into something lethal. Come then, Vladimir, challenge me properly. Face me in single combat as our laws dictate. Show me you are worthy to rule in my place. Vladimir launched himself at Draev with supernatural speed, fangs bared, hands curved into claws. But Draev moved faster, a blur of motion that Brenna's eyes couldn't track. One moment Vladimir was attacking. The next, Draev held him by the throat, lifting him into the air with one hand. You were always too ambitious and too stupid, Draev said almost sadly. I should have executed you years ago when you first showed signs of treachery. But I believed in mercy then. I believed everyone deserved second chances. His grip tightened. I have learned better. Vladimir's form began to deteriorate, just like the vampire in the alley. His skin grayed, his body withered, until nothing remained but ash that drifted to the ancient stone floor. Draev released the dust and turned to face his court. I have been absent. I have been negligent in my duties. I have let my own pain and guilt blind me to the needs of my people. For this I apologize. His voice carried to every corner of the vast hall. But I am not abdicating. I am not abandoning this throne again. I am your king, now and until someone proves themselves strong enough to take my crown through honorable challenge. Is this understood? The assembled vampires bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Nikolai rose and approached, a smile playing at his lips. Welcome back, your majesty. We have much to discuss about the state of the kingdom. Perhaps after you have seen your guest safely home? Draev's formal mask cracked slightly. He looked at Brenna, and she saw uncertainty flicker in his silver eyes. Yes, Brenna should not be here. This is not her world. But Brenna planted her feet and crossed her arms. Oh no, you don't get to claim me as blood sworn to your house and then send me home like nothing happened. We need to talk, Draev. Really talk. Nikolai's eyebrows rose. She speaks to you like that? She speaks to me like I am a person rather than a title, Draev replied. It is refreshing and occasionally infuriating. He offered Brenna his arm. Very well, we will talk. Nikolai, begin preparations for a full court session tomorrow night. Send word to all the houses that the king has returned and will be receiving petitioners and station guards around this human's apartment building. I want her neighborhood protected until I say otherwise. As you command, my king. Draev led Brenna through the vast castle because that's what it was, she realized. A genuine castle hidden beneath the modern city. They passed through corridors lined with artwork that belonged in museums. Crossed halls filled with vampires who bowed as their king passed. Climbed staircases carved from single pieces of marble. Finally, they reached a chamber that was clearly Draev's private quarters. It was less ostentatious than the rest of the castle, but still overwhelming, a massive bed with curtains like midnight, walls lined with bookcases holding volumes in dozens of languages, furniture that managed to be both antique and comfortable, and windows covered with heavy drapes to block out any potential sunlight. Draev closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted despite the supernatural power that still clung to him. I am sorry. I never meant for you to be drawn into this world. Never meant to endanger you. You claimed me, Brenna said, the words coming out more accusatory than she intended. What does that mean exactly? Blood sworn to House Erasmus? It means you are under my personal protection. Any vampire who harms you would be committing an act of war against my entire house. It is the strongest shield I could place around you. He moved away from the door, began pacing like a caged predator. It also means I have bound you to me in a way that my kind will interpret as possessive. Romantic even, it marks you as mine, Brenna. As belonging to the king. I don't belong to anyone. I know. Forgive me. In that moment with Vladimir's people surrounding you, it was the only way I could think to keep you safe. I can revoke the claim if you wish, though it would leave you vulnerable. I didn't say I wanted you to revoke it, Brenna interrupted. She moved closer to him, watching the way he tensed as the distance between them shrank. I just want to know what it means, what you meant when you said it. Draev stopped pacing and looked at her with those ancient silver eyes that held centuries of loneliness. It means that somewhere in the last 2 months, between conversations on doorsteps and shared meals, and your stubborn refusal to abandon me even after you learned the truth, I have done something incredibly foolish. I have fallen in love with you, Brenna Mitchell. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and impossibility. That is foolish, Brenna agreed, her heart hammering. Because I've fallen in love with you too, and we both know this can't work. You're immortal. I'm human. You're a king with responsibilities to an entire supernatural nation. I'm a baker who can barely pay rent. You drink blood and rule from a hidden castle. I make bread and live in a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling. Precisely. It is doomed from the start. But Draev reached out and cupped her face with one cold hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. And yet I cannot regret it. These weeks with you have been the first time in centuries that I have felt truly alive, truly seen, not as a king or a monster but simply as myself. So what do we do? I do not know. I have ruled kingdoms and navigated centuries of politics, but I have no idea how to navigate this. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I want you, Brenna. Want you with an intensity that frightens me. But I have nothing good to offer you. Only darkness and danger and an existence half hidden from the world. What if that's enough? What if I want the darkness and danger if it means being with you? Then you are just as foolish as I am. Brenna rose onto her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Draev froze, caught off guard. Then his arms came around her with desperate strength, pulling her against his cold body as he kissed her back with 800 years of loneliness and longing poured into the touch of lips. His mouth was cold but gentle, his fangs carefully sheathed, his hands cradling her like she was something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brenna was breathing hard. Draev didn't technically need to breathe, he pressed his forehead against hers. This is madness, he whispered. Probably. But I've done plenty of sensible things in my life, and they've all led to me being broke, alone, and working a job I don't love. Maybe it's time to try something mad. You could be turned, become one of us, then we would have eternity together. But even as he said it, Brenna heard the reluctance in his voice. You don't want that. No, forgive me, but no. This existence, it is a curse as much as a gift. The endless years watching everyone you love age and die. The constant hunger, the political machinations that never end. I would not wish it on you. Would not take your humanity, your warmth, your mortality. Those things are precious. I have spent centuries envying what you possess naturally. So we have my lifetime. However long the decades at most. A blink of an eye for me. And every moment I will know that you are aging while I remain frozen. That you will die while I continue. That I will lose you. His voice cracked. I have lost so much over the centuries, Brenna. I do not know if I can bear to lose you too. Then we make the most of the time we have. Brenna pulled back enough to look into his silver eyes. No one gets forever, Draev. Not really. Even immortals like you could be killed in battle, overthrown by rivals, destroyed by accident or intention. The only thing anyone really has is now. This moment, and I choose to spend my moments with you, however many or few I have. Draev studied her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. Then slowly he nodded. Very well. Then I choose you, Brenna Mitchell. For however long fate allows us, I choose you. They kissed again, slower this time, exploring rather than desperate. His hands were gentle as they traced her waist, her back, tangling carefully in her hair. She mapped the angles of his face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the pointed tips of his ears that she'd never noticed before. When her fingers brushed the elongated canines he couldn't fully retract, he shuddered against her. I should take you home, he murmured against her lips. It is late, and you have work tomorrow. I'm calling in sick. I think nearly being kidnapped by vampires counts as a valid excuse. He laughed, a sound she'd rarely heard from him, warm and genuine despite coming from an undead throat. Very well, then stay. Let me show you what it means to be claimed by a vampire king. The words sent heat curling through Brenna's stomach. Show me. Over the following weeks, Brenna's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She kept her apartment, kept her job at the bakery, maintained the appearance of normalcy. But her nights belonged to Draev and his world. He taught her about vampire culture, introduced her to members of his court who ranged from centuries-old scholars to young fledglings still learning control. She met Nikolai, properly discovered that beneath his formal exterior was a sharp wit and genuine affection for his king that had survived 4 centuries of service. He is different with you, Nikolai told her one night while Draev was dealing with some political matter. They sat in what Brenna had learned was called the minor hall, a small room that was still larger than her entire apartment. More like the vampire he was before the weight of the crown crushed him. You have given him back something I feared was lost forever. What's that? Hope, the belief that he can be more than just a king, that he can be simply Draev, at least for a few hours at a time. Brenna watched through the doorway as Draev listened to a petitioner, some dispute about hunting territory that seemed tedious but necessary. He wore his power like a cloak now, no longer trying to hide or diminish himself. But when his eyes found her across the room, they softened, and the king became just a man or vampire who was grateful she was there. They established routines. Brenna would finish her shift at the bakery, go home and rest for a few hours. Then Draev would come for her after sunset. Sometimes they stayed in his chambers, talking and kissing, and exploring the careful physical intimacy that was possible between human and vampire. Other times he took her through the city at supernatural speed, showing her rooftops and hidden places no human normally saw. He taught her about his world while she taught him about hers, showed him YouTube videos and explained internet memes, and dragged him to a 24-hour diner at 3 in the morning for pancakes. "This is absurd," he said, staring at the stack of chocolate chip pancakes like they might attack him. "Why would anyone eat this much sugar at this hour?" "Because it's delicious and occasionally humans do things just for joy, not survival." Brenna drowned her own pancakes in syrup. "Try it, I dare you." He took a careful bite, his expression skeptical. Then his eyes widened. "These are actually quite good. Told you, 800 years old and you're still learning new things." "I am learning many new things because of you," he said, his voice going soft. "Not just about modern food and technology, about myself, about what I want beyond duty and obligation, and what do you want?" "This you." Moments of absurd normalcy in a life that has been anything but normal for longer than I can clearly remember. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to steal minutes and hours and days with you. I want to watch you create beauty in your bakery. I want to show you wonders that most humans never imagine. I want to hold you while you sleep and stand guard against anything that might harm you. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want a lifetime, your lifetime. I want to be selfish enough to claim every moment you will give me, even knowing it will destroy me when you are gone." Brenna's throat tightened. They'd been dancing around the mortality issue for weeks now, neither wanting to voice the inevitable truth that she would age and die while he remained forever frozen at whatever age he'd been turned. "I'm not gone yet," she said firmly. "I'm right here, and I plan to be here for a long time. Decades, if I'm lucky. That's decades of pancakes at 3 a.m. and stolen kisses and teaching you about the modern world. Decades of you showing me your world and protecting me from the dangerous parts. That's not nothing, Draev. That's a whole life, a mortal life, the only kind I've got. You can either spend the next however many years dreading my eventual death, or you can spend them actually living with me. Your choice." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-world courtesy. "You shame me with your courage. I, who have lived for 8 centuries, am the coward who fears the future. While you, who have perhaps 50 or 60 years if fortune favors you, face it without hesitation. Well, one of us has to be brave. Might as well be me." But the mortality question wasn't the only challenge they faced. The vampire court was not universally pleased about their king's attachment to a human. Some saw it as weakness, others as an opportunity to curry favor or cause trouble. Brenna needed guards whenever she moved through the castle, needed to learn complex etiquette, to avoid accidentally insulting ancient vampires who were dangerously sensitive about protocol. And then there was the blood issue. Draev still needed to feed, though he'd continued his practice of stealing from blood banks rather than hunting humans directly. But Brenna could see the strain it cost him, especially when she was near. She could feel his hunger sometimes, radiating from him like heat, could see the way his eyes would track her pulse when she tilted her head wrong. "You should feed from me," she said one night, lying in his arms in the massive bed. "I know you want to, I can tell." "Absolutely not." His arms tightened around her. "I will not take that risk. One moment of lost control and I could drain you, could turn you, could destroy everything about you that I cherish. Or you could trust yourself, trust your control. You're the vampire king, Draev. If anyone has the strength to stop before doing harm, it's you. I cannot. Ask me anything else, my throne, my wealth, my loyalty unto death, but do not ask me to risk you in that way." So she dropped the subject, though she made note of the vampires in the court who did have mortal consorts. They seemed healthy, happy even, suggesting that the arrangement could work. But Draev's fear was bone deep, rooted in 800 years of witnessing what happened when vampires lost control around those they cared for. Christmas came and went. Brenna spent Christmas Eve with Draev in his chambers, exchanging gifts like any normal couple. She gave him a leather-bound journal, empty pages waiting to be filled. "For new memories," she explained. "You've got 8 centuries of history, time to start writing new chapters." He gave her a necklace, an antique pendant with a red stone that seemed to glow with internal fire. "This belonged to my mother," he said, fastening it around her neck with gentle hands. "It is one of the few things I have from my mortal life. I want you to have it." Brenna touched the pendant, feeling the weight of centuries in the metal. "Draev, I can't, this is too much. It is not enough. Nothing I possess is enough to repay what you have given me. But it is a start." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face against her neck, not to feed, just to be close. "You are the best gift I have received in 800 years, Brenna Mitchell. You are daylight in a life that has been nothing but darkness." They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful and achingly tender. Draev was endlessly gentle, hyper-aware of his strength and the fragility of her human body. And when it was over, when they lay tangled together in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, Brenna felt something click into place. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. Even if it couldn't last forever, the danger she'd been half expecting came in late January. Brenna was walking home from the bakery on one of the rare evenings when Draev was stuck in court sessions until after midnight. He'd assigned her guards 2 young vampires named Thomas and Elena, who followed at a discreet distance. But 3 blocks from her apartment, a van screeched to a stop beside her. Men poured out, humans, not vampires, which surprised her. They grabbed her before she could scream, before Thomas and Elena could intervene. Something sharp jabbed into her arm, chemicals flooding her system, and the world went fuzzy. She woke in a concrete room that smelled like mildew and old blood. Her head pounded, and her mouth tasted like copper. No windows, 1 door, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And across from her, chained to the wall, was Draev. He looked terrible. His skin had gone from pale to nearly gray, veins standing out dark against his face and hands. His clothes were torn, and burns marked his chest and arms, the kind of burns that came from silver or holy objects, things that hurt vampires specifically. "Brenna." Her name came out as a rasp. "You should not be here. This was not you. Were supposed to be safe." "What happened? Who did this?" "Hunters. Vampire hunters allied with the remnants of Vladimir's conspiracy. They have been planning this for weeks. Used you to lure me into a trap." He tried to move and gasped in pain, chains clanking. "Silver, blessed silver, I cannot break it in my current state." Brenna struggled against her own restraints, regular rope, thankfully tied tight but not supernaturally reinforced. "Your people will come for us. Nikolai will find us, perhaps, if they can track us in time. But these hunters are experienced. They know how to hide from vampire senses. They have blocked us with wards and prayers and old magic that my kind cannot easily pierce." The door opened and a woman entered, middle-aged, tired-looking, carrying a gun that probably had silver bullets. Behind her came 2 men, both armed, both watching Draev with the wariness of people who knew exactly how dangerous a vampire could be, even when weakened and chained. "Finally awake," the woman said, looking at Brenna. "Good. I was starting to worry we'd used too much sedative. Dead bait doesn't work as well." "Let her go," Draev said, his voice dropping into that terrible register of command. "Your quarrel is with me. She is innocent, human, one of your own. She's a collaborator. She feeds vampires, sleeps with them, betrays her own species by consorting with monsters." The woman moved closer to Brenna, the gun steady in her hand. "I'm Margaret Hayes. 20 years ago, a vampire killed my daughter, drained her dry and left her body in an alley like garbage. I've been hunting your kind ever since, and I've killed dozens. But never a king, never one of the old ones. You're going to be my masterpiece." "Your daughter's death was a tragedy," Draev said, clearly struggling to remain diplomatic despite his pain. "But I had nothing to do with it. I enforce laws against reckless killing. The vampire who murdered your child would have faced execution under my justice, your justice. Like it matters. Like you're anything but predators playing at civilization." Margaret turned the gun toward Draev. "You're all guilty, every single one of you. Monsters who should have been wiped out centuries ago. So you kill the one king who actually tries to protect humans, the one who punishes vampires for breaking laws against murder?" Brenna couldn't keep quiet anymore. "He's been living on my doorstep for months. If he was the monster you think he is, I'd be dead 100 times over. Instead, he saved a woman from being murdered. He enforces laws that keep his people from turning your cities into feeding grounds. And you're going to kill him for it? He's a vampire. That's enough." Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger. "But don't worry, you'll be joining him shortly. Can't leave witnesses." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the concrete room, but the bullet never reached Draev. Brenna had thrown herself sideways, rope snapping when had she gotten free, and tackled Margaret. The bullet went wide, burying itself in concrete. They hit the floor hard, Brenna fighting with a desperation she didn't know she possessed. Margaret was trained, stronger, but Brenna had the advantage of surprise and the kind of fury that came from watching someone threaten the person you loved. The 2 male hunters moved to intervene, but the door exploded inward. Nikolai led the charge, followed by what looked like half the vampire court. They swarmed the hunters with supernatural speed and precision, disarming them in seconds. One of the men tried to run and was tackled by Thomas, the young guard who was supposed to have been protecting Brenna earlier. Elena moved to Draev, producing a key that somehow fit the silver chains. "My king," Nikolai said. kneeling briefly before Draev as the chains fell away. Forgive our delay, they had hidden you well. Draev barely seemed to hear him. He crossed to Brenna in 3 long strides, pulling her up from where she'd been struggling with Margaret and into his arms. You foolish, brave, impossible woman. You could have been killed. So could you? That bullet would have done real damage, wouldn't it? Silver? She could feel him trembling against her, weakened by whatever they'd done to him. Yes, probably would not have killed me, but it would have hurt tremendously. He pulled back enough to check her for injuries, hands running over her arms and face. Are you harmed? Bruised, pissed off, but okay. She looked past him to where Margaret was being restrained by 2 vampires. What happens to them now? That is an excellent question. Draev's expression hardened as he turned to face the hunters. You attacked a vampire king, kidnapped his claimed consort, conspired with traitors to my court. By ancient law, the penalty is death. Then kill us, Margaret spat. Make yourself into the monster we know you are. Draev looked at her for a long moment and Brenna could see him thinking, weighing options. Finally he sighed. No, I am tired of death, tired of executions and justice that looks like revenge. You will be turned over to human authorities, charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. You will face human justice. Your knowledge of vampires will be dismissed as insanity brought on by grief. And you will live, Margaret Hayes. You will live and eventually, perhaps, find peace that your daughter never received from you, choosing vengeance over healing. You're letting them go? Nikolai sounded scandalized. I am letting human law deal with humans who committed crimes against humans. Brenna was kidnapped. That is a matter for her people's justice system. They will be punished, but not by us. Not tonight. Draev swayed slightly, and Brenna moved to support him. I am done with blood and death for one evening. Take me home, Nikolai, all of us, and station guards around this building until the human police arrive. The vampires moved to obey, though several looked deeply unhappy about letting the hunters live. But none questioned their king's decision openly. Back at the castle, Draev collapsed onto his bed with a groan. The burns on his chest and arms looked painful, the flesh reddened and weeping. Brenna had never seen him so vulnerable, so clearly hurt. What do you need? She asked, kneeling beside the bed. Blood? Medicine? What helps vampires heal? Blood. Always blood. But I have supplies Nikolai will bring. He stopped as Brenna pulled a small knife from the table. Beside the bed had Nikolai left it there deliberately, and drew the blade across her palm before he could stop her. Brenna, no, shut up and drink, she said, pressing her bleeding hand to his mouth. You're hurt, you need blood, I'm right here. So stop being noble and take what you need. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then his control snapped. His mouth closed over her palm and she felt the draw as he began to feed. It didn't hurt exactly, more like a pull, a sensation of something flowing out of her. His eyes closed and she watched color return to his face, watched the burns begin to heal with supernatural speed. He took less than she expected, maybe only a few mouthfuls before he pulled away with a gasp. Enough, any more would weaken you. But you're not fully healed. I will survive, but I will not risk you further. He pressed his mouth to her bleeding palm, and she felt something warm and tingling, his venom sealing the wound. When he pulled away, only a faint pink line remained. Thank you. You have given me a gift I do not deserve. You deserve a lot more than you think. Brenna climbed onto the bed beside him, careful of his injuries. Why did you let the hunters go? I thought vampire justice was swift and brutal. Usually it is. But Margaret Hayes is not my enemy, not truly. She is a grieving mother who has spent 20 years in pain, lashing out at anything that reminds her of her loss. Killing her would not bring justice. It would simply create more grief, more pain for anyone who loves her. And I am tired of the cycle. He turned his head to look at her. You were right what you said months ago. I cannot undo the past by adding more blood to it. I cannot redeem myself through more violence. Perhaps it is time to try a different path. What kind of path? One where vampire law and human law work together rather than in opposition. Where hunters like Margaret receive therapy and support for their losses rather than being left to fester in rage. Where we stop hiding in shadows and start finding ways to coexist. He smiled tiredly. Impossible, probably. But I have 800 years of impossible behind me. What is one more impossibility? Brenna leaned down and kissed him gently, careful not to jar his injuries. I think it's a good impossibility. One worth pursuing. They lay together in comfortable silence while Draev healed, his supernatural body repairing damage that would have killed a human. Brenna traced patterns on his chest, avoiding the worst of the burns, just maintaining contact. I tasted your soul, Draev said suddenly. When I drank from you, it is an effect of the blood bond. When a vampire feeds directly from someone they love, I felt your determination, your courage, your absolute certainty that I was worth saving. His voice went rough. No one has believed that about me in longer than I can remember. Then they're idiots. You're a good man, Draev, good vampire, good king. You just need to believe it about yourself. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply need you to keep believing it loudly enough for both of us. Over the following months, Draev began implementing his impossible vision. He reached out to human authorities carefully, through proxies and intermediaries, establishing lines of communication that had never existed before. He created councils where vampire lords and human officials could discuss issues that affected both species: rogue vampires who broke laws, humans who hunted innocents, ways to manage coexistence. It was slow, frustrating work. Many humans didn't believe vampires were real. Many vampires thought their king had gone soft, compromised by his mortal lover. But gradually, carefully, progress happened. Laws were drafted, protocols established, a framework began to form, and through it all, Brenna was there. She became something unprecedented, a human voice in the vampire court, someone who could speak to her own people's concerns while understanding the vampire perspective. She negotiated, mediated, helped bridge the vast cultural gap between species. She also finally quit her job at the bakery and accepted Draev's offer to help her open her own place. It was small, tucked into a neighborhood that was mostly vampire-owned, serving both species. Her bread became famous in the supernatural community. Apparently vampires could eat solid food, even if they didn't need it, and many had missed good baking. She called it Mitchell's Bakery, and above the door hung a sign with her mother's name. In memory of Caroline Mitchell, who taught me that food is love. On the bakery's 1-year anniversary, Draev took her back to the doorstep where they'd met. It has been 18 months, he said, looking at the spot where he used to sit. 18 months since you stumbled over a ragged beggar and decided to show him mercy. Best decision I ever made, Brenna replied, leaning against him. Even if you did turn out to be secret royalty with a kingdom and everything. I am sorry I was not more forthcoming at the start. Are you kidding? If you'd led with, "Hi, I'm a vampire king," I would have run screaming. The homeless vagrant angle was way less terrifying. She turned to face him, taking both his cold hands in her warm ones. We did good, Draev. Look at what we've built. The bakery, the councils, the framework for humans and vampires to actually work together. Your court is stable. The Northern Territory is at peace. We made impossible things happen. You made impossible things happen. I merely stopped being a coward long enough to help. We made it happen together. That's the point. She reached up to cup his face, thumb brushing across his sharp cheekbone. I love you. However much time we have, I want to spend it doing this, building good things, making the world a little better, stealing moments of happiness between crises. I love you as well. More than I have words to express. More than 8 centuries of vocabulary can capture. He pulled a small box from his pocket, antique carved wood that looked very old. Which brings me to my question. Brenna Mitchell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Brenna's breath caught. Inside the box was a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen, a band of white gold, wrapped around a stone that seemed to shift between red and silver, ancient and beautiful and perfect. You want to marry me? I want to bind myself to you in every way possible. Human marriage, vampire bonding, any and all ceremonies that will mark you as mine and me as yours for whatever time we are granted. His silver eyes were bright with emotion. I know it is unorthodox. I know it complicates both our worlds. But I am tired of hiding what you mean to me. I want to proclaim it formally, legally, in ways both our people will recognize. If you will have me, yes. The word came out choked with happy tears. Yes, of course, yes. Did you really think I'd say anything else? He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that was witnessed by no one except the city night and the ghosts of their own pasts. When they broke apart, both were grinning like idiots. When? Brenna asked. When do we do this? Whenever you wish. I have waited 800 years for this feeling. I can wait a few more months for ceremony planning. How about spring? April, maybe. At the bakery, small ceremony, our closest people. Nothing huge or formal. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. They married on a rainy April evening at Mitchell's Bakery, with the smell of fresh bread filling the air and fairy lights strung from the ceiling. Nikolai stood as Draev's best man, formal and elegant in dark velvet. Sandra from the old bakery job stood with Brenna, crying happy tears through the entire ceremony. The guest list was small but meaningful, a careful mix of humans and vampires who had become their friends and allies over the past months. Margaret Hayes was not invited, but she sent a card from prison, a simple note that read, "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe not all monsters are the same. I hope you find peace together." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The ceremony itself was brief, a mix of traditional human vows and ancient vampire bonding rites that Draev spoke in a language that predated English. When it came time to seal the bond, He bit carefully into his thumb and pressed it to Brenna's lips, letting her taste a single drop of his blood, not enough to turn her, just enough to create the mystical bond that vampires recognized as marriage. Then she cut her own thumb with a ceremonial knife and returned the gesture, letting him taste her life, her warmth, her humanity. The bond snapped into place like a lock clicking home, and suddenly Brenna could feel him, his presence, his emotions, the steady anchor of his existence connected to her own mortality. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said, a human judge who'd been one of the first to work with Draev's councils. "You may kiss." And they did, to applause from their assembled guests. Human and vampire alike, the reception lasted until dawn, with the vampire guests slipping away one by one as sunrise approached. Draev stayed as long as he could, dancing with his new wife under the fairy lights, feeding her cake chocolate with raspberry filling, her mother's favorite, and listening to the toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. "To the king who learned to be human again," Nikolai said, raising his glass of dark wine that Brenna suspected wasn't wine at all. "And to the human who taught him. May their union bring light to dark places and hope to those who had forgotten it existed." As the last guest departed and the sun began to paint the sky pink, Draev pulled Brenna close. "I must go soon. The sun will rise fully in less than an hour." "I know. I'll clean up here and meet you at home tonight." "Home," he tested the word, a smile playing at his lips. "I have not had a true home in 800 years. Not until you sap," Brenna accused. But she was smiling too. "Go on. Before you start sparkling or bursting into flames or whatever it is you do in sunlight." "I do not sparkle. That would be undignified." He kissed her once more, deep and lingering. "I will see you tonight, my wife. Tonight, my husband." She watched him leave, slipping into the shadows with his remaining court members, headed for the castle beneath the city where they would wait out the daylight hours. Then she turned back to the bakery, her bakery, and began the process of cleaning up. But she wasn't sad, wasn't lonely, because in a few hours when the sun set again, Draev would come for her. They would go home together to the chambers he'd expanded to accommodate her things, her books, her very human needs. They would talk and laugh and steal whatever hours they could from the responsibilities that always waited. They would live for however long fate allowed. And maybe that's what all the stories got wrong. Brenna thought as she packed away leftover cake and took down decorations. The happy ending wasn't about forever. It was about choosing to build something good with the time you had. About finding light in dark places. About feeding ragged beggars on doorsteps and discovering that sometimes the broken things you try to help end up saving you right back. 5 years passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Brenna's bakery expanded, became a legitimate gathering place where humans and vampires could mix safely. She hired a staff both species and taught them not just how to bake, but how to create spaces where different kinds of people could find common ground over good bread and better coffee. The councils Draev had established grew stronger, more sophisticated. Vampire law and human law began to interweave in ways that protected both species. Rogue vampires faced justice from their own kind before human authorities even knew a crime had occurred. Hunters like Margaret were offered counseling and support instead of being left to fester in rage and pain. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still moments of violence and fear, but it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. And through it all, Brenna and Draev built a life together. They traveled when they could always at night, to places where Draev's sensitivity to sunlight wouldn't limit them too much. They hosted gatherings that mixed both their worlds, political events that doubled as genuine parties. They fought and made up and learned to navigate the peculiar challenges of a marriage between mortal and immortal. Brenna saw her first gray hair on the morning of her 35th birthday. She stared at it in the mirror for a long moment, aware that Draev stood behind her in their shared bathroom, his reflection absent from the glass but his presence tangible. "It begins," she said softly. "You are as beautiful now as the night we met. More so, because I know you better, love you deeper." His hand settled on her shoulders. "A strand of gray hair does not change that, but it's a reminder that I'm aging. That someday is not today. Today you are here, we are together, that is enough." Brenna turned to face him, this impossibly patient vampire who had waited centuries for something he didn't even know he needed. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing someone who will die on you? Every day. And also never. The pain of losing you will be devastating. I know this. I have already begun to grieve for that future moment." He cupped her face gently. "But the joy of having you, of loving you, of building this life with you, it is worth any amount of future pain. You taught me that. You taught me that love is worth the cost, that connection matters more than safety, that a mortal lifetime shared is more valuable than immortal centuries spent alone. I'm scared," Brenna admitted. Of getting old while you stay young. Of becoming weak while you remain strong. Of you watching me fade. Then we face that fear together as we have faced everything else. And when the time comes when you are elderly and I am still frozen at 33, I will still love you. We'll still see the woman who showed mercy to a ragged beggar, who faced down vampires and hunters with equal courage, who changed the world by refusing to accept that kindness was foolish. He kissed her forehead. You are not your body, Brenna. You are the light that burns inside it. And that light will never dim for me, no matter how many years pass. She held him tightly, this ancient creature who had learned humanity from her, and let herself believe him. More years passed. Brenna turned 40, then 45. She cut back hours at the bakery, trained managers to handle the day-to-day operations. The gray in her hair spread, lines formed around her eyes and mouth. Her body began the slow process of aging that all mortals faced. Draev never changed, never aged, never stopped looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. It's not fair, she said one night, lying in their bed after a particularly exhausting day. You're going to look like this forever, and I'm turning into an old woman. You are turning into a distinguished, experienced woman who has lived a full and remarkable life. There is no shame in that, no loss of beauty. He traced the lines at the corner of her eye. These are evidence of all the times you have laughed. These, he touched the creases around her mouth, are proof of words spoken, emotions expressed, food tasted and savored. Every mark on your body is a story. How could I see them as anything but precious? You're impossible. I am in love. There is a difference. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary at the bakery, surrounded by friends from both worlds. Nikolai gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. Sandra, now managing 3 locations of Mitchell's bakery, presented them with a cake she'd made herself, imperfect, heartfelt, decorated with shaky icing that spelled out, "Forever isn't long enough. Forever is all we've got," Brenna replied, cutting into the cake with Draev's cold hand covering her aging one. Might as well make it count. At 50, Brenna was diagnosed with a heart condition, nothing immediately life-threatening, but a reminder that mortal bodies wore out eventually. She took medication, adjusted her lifestyle, refused to let it slow her down too much, but she knew what it meant. Knew that the end, however distant, was creeping closer. Draev became more protective, hovering whenever her energy flagged, insisting on the best doctors human and vampire medicine could provide. He researched obsessively, looking for ways to extend mortal lifespans without resorting to turning her into a vampire, a line they'd both agreed never to cross. I'm going to die someday, Brenna told him gently when she found him in his study at 3 a.m., surrounded by medical text and ancient scrolls. That's not a failure. That's not something you can prevent or fix. It's just the reality of being human. I refuse to accept that. There must be something, some treatment, some magic, some way to give you more time. Even if there is, it's not infinite. I'm mortal, Draev. That's not going to change. And honestly, she moved to him, threading her fingers through his white hair. I don't want it to change. I don't want to be a vampire. I don't want immortality. I want the life I have for as long as I have it. With you, I am not ready to lose you. I know. But you're going to have to be eventually, and when that time comes, I need you to promise me something. She waited until he met her eyes. Promise me you'll keep going. That you'll stay on your throne, keep building the world we started creating together. Keep being the good king I know you are. Don't go back to that doorstep. Don't give up. Promise me. His jaw clenched. You ask the impossible. I ask for the necessary. Promise me, Draev. I promise, he said finally, the words torn from somewhere deep. I will not abandon what we built. I will honor your memory by continuing the work. But do not expect me to be whole without you. That is beyond even my abilities. Then be broken, be sad. Grieve as long as you need. But keep living, keep trying, keep being the man I fell in love with, who learned that mercy and strength could coexist. She kissed him softly. That's all I ask. But the end didn't come as quickly as they feared. Brenna's condition stabilized with treatment. She celebrated her 55th birthday, then her 60th, then her 65th. Her hair went fully white, matching Draev's. Her body slowed, grew frailer, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undiminished. They adjusted, learned to navigate this new phase. Brenna stepped back from active business management but remained a beloved figurehead of the bakery empire she'd built. Draev governed his territory with the wisdom of centuries and the compassion Brenna had taught him. Together, they remained a symbol of what was possible when 2 worlds chose to build bridges instead of walls. On the night of her 70th birthday, Brenna asked Draev to take her back to the doorstep where they'd met. It looked different now. The building had been renovated, the neighborhood gentrified, the streetlight replaced with modern LED fixtures. But the spot was still there, The brick wall where Draev had huddled in the rain while pretending to be nothing more than a ragged beggar. Hard to believe it's been almost 30 years, Brenna said, leaning heavily on Draev's arm. Her legs weren't as steady as they used to be, her bones growing fragile with age. 30 years since I stumbled over you and made the best stupid decision of my life. Nothing about you has ever been stupid. Reckless, perhaps. Impossibly brave, but never stupid. He held her carefully, as if she were made of glass. I owe you everything, Brenna. You saved me, gave me purpose again. Taught me that even monsters could be worthy of love if they were willing to change. You were never a monster. You were just lost and lonely, like I was. She looked up at him, this beautiful, impossible creature who had chosen her out of all the people and vampires across 8 centuries. Thank you for finding me, for letting me find you, for giving me a life I never could have imagined. The gratitude is mine. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, across 800 years of existence. I will carry you in my heart for whatever eternity remains to me. They stood together in the place where it had all started, mortal and immortal, human and vampire, 2 impossible people who had somehow made it work. The city hummed around them, alive with both their kinds now, mixing in ways that would have been unthinkable 3 decades earlier. They had changed the world, together, and when Brenna's legs gave out, when her old body finally decided it had stood long enough, Draev caught her with supernatural speed and held her close. Take me home, she whispered. I'm tired, of course, my love, always. He carried her through the night streets, moving with the careful speed that wouldn't jar her fragile frame, and brought her home to the chambers they'd shared for decades. He laid her in their bed, surrounded her with softness and warmth, and held her hand while she drifted toward sleep. Draev, her voice was barely audible. I am here, love you so much, worth it, all of it, worth it, I love you too, more than words can express. More than eternity can measure, remember your promise, keep going, be good, be the king, the man I know you are. I remember. I promise. She smiled, squeezed his hand with what little strength remained, and closed her eyes. Brenna Mitchell died 3 days later. Peacefully in her sleep, with her vampire husband holding her hand and their friends, human and vampire alike, gathered around to say goodbye. Draev kept his promise. He grieved openly, devastatingly, in ways that shocked his court, who had never seen their ancient king so undone. But he did not abandon his throne, did not retreat back into exile and self-destruction. He governed his territory with the wisdom Brenna had helped him develop, enforced laws that protected both species, continued building the framework they'd started together. He expanded Mitchell's bakery into a full foundation, offering training and opportunities to people from both worlds. He established scholarships in Brenna's name. He worked with human authorities to create better systems for addressing the grief that drove hunters like Margaret toward violence. And on the anniversary of the night they met, every single year without fail, he returned to that doorstep, brought food from the bakery, bread and soup, cookies and pastries, all made using Brenna's recipes, left it there for whoever might need it, along with a small card that read, "In memory of Brenna Mitchell, who taught me that kindness matters most." Decades passed. Centuries. Eventually, the world changed in ways Brenna never lived to see. But the vampires who told stories of their king always mentioned the human woman who had changed everything. The mortal who had fed a ragged beggar and discovered he was a king. The baker who had built bridges between worlds that had been separate for millennia. And Draev kept going, kept living, kept building the better world she'd believed in. Because he'd promised. Because she'd been worth it. Because love, real love, the kind that accepted mortality and chose connection anyway, was always worth the cost, even when it hurt, even when it meant continuing alone, even when forever wasn't long enough. But on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the city slept, Draev would stand on that doorstep and swear he could still feel her presence, could still hear her voice telling him he was worth saving, could still feel the warmth of her hand in his cold one, her living heat against his undead stillness. Worth it, he would whisper to the empty street, to the ghosts of the past, to the memory of a woman who had changed 800 years of darkness with simple, stubborn kindness. You were worth everything, Brenna Mitchell, and I will spend eternity proving that the love we shared, mortal and brief as it was, mattered more than all my immortal years combined. The city never answered, but Draev didn't need it to. He had his memories, his promise, his purpose, and somewhere in whatever came after death he believed Brenna was smiling, proud of the good king he had become because of her. That was enough. It had to be, because love, real, true, impossible love, was always worth it, even when forever wasn't long enough.